Amen. So we have 4 questions that was set aside for this time. So we would like to answer those 4 questions. So the first one is this. It's up there for you. It's going to be up there for you. The first question is, okay, I got yelled on first service for reading the questions. My wife yelled at me. So Matt is supposed to read the questions.
Okay, yeah. You'll see why when we get to the second question. There's some words in there Sam struggled with a little bit. But
okay, are you going to pick on my English now? Are you seriously?
Most people will struggle with those words in the second question. But, okay, so the first question, I was really looking forward to hearing about the relating science to faith, but this series provided a little substance beyond. Our world is complex, so there must be a God. Do you have final words to the skeptics among our congregation? So go ahead.
Yeah, so as Matt and I sat down in my office this week and we thought this is a good question. It was a very well put together question. There is a word that jumped out of that statement to me. It was the word skeptical, right? It was the word skeptical that comes out of it. And here's one of the things that I want to say. In the church, we have crucified those who are skeptic. A skeptic is not. It is people who are in. I like to define skeptics is someone who is pursuing the truth, is seeking for knowledge, is someone who is asking questions and digging it in and exploring in order to know, to find the truth and to get some knowledge. So skepticism is not a bad thing. If you go back into the Gospels, we see the disciples themselves being skeptical of the resurrection of Jesus. One of them even said like, I don't know about this resurrection thing. I got to see Jesus. I got to touch Jesus. If I don't see, if I don't touch, I don't believe it. Well, skeptic is met with some knowledge. Jesus shows up to him and he's like, okay, touch it here, the holes, right? And so he was the Thomas and he came to believe. So, but here's a thing about that question that we kind of we're toiling a little bit about the question itself. The person that is skeptical on this question, is he skeptical or she skeptical on the complexity of the world or that God existed, right? So we kind of were toiling with that.
Yeah, so if you go to slide number 51 on there, so we'll call up one of the slides from what we were talking about before. So the goal here in the 3 weeks that I was talking was I went through all the stuff, the physical world, the things that we read in Genesis 1. I mean, there's tons more than just in Genesis 1, but I kind of tried to hold it to that. And, from the formation of the galaxies and the stars to our Earth, to our climate that brings upon all the living things that support us, and eventually to man. And, I kind of got us up this line, and I stopped at that arrow because that's just the physical world, okay? I didn't bring the arrow all the way. I purposely left that near, not at the top of that line because we're just talking about the physical world. And the point that I was trying to come across with is that it's reasonable to believe, as most of us in here probably do, that a God exists due to the complexity that we see out there in nature, okay? And if you have at least that baseline of, I think it's reasonable to believe that a God exists, then you have that foundation to talk to a skeptic or an atheist to say, okay, now let's talk about, okay, it's at least reasonable. I don't think we're going to get to the level of proof. We just have a lot of evidence that says, okay, this is reasonable. And then you can build upon that with these other things that we talk about in faith. Things about like, okay, what is the character of this God like then? If there is possibly a God, now let's talk about what he's like. And above that arrow are things like relationship, love, morality. Why does that feeling in your gut that something is wrong, why can't you ignore that? If you're just a function of the physical world, why is it so visceral, so unignorable that something is right or wrong? That's where we bring in a whole nother level of complexity above that, but that's not so much in the physical world. So this is kind of just to create that baseline of it's reasonable based upon the complexity we see to conclude that there is a designer behind this, and now we can start to characterize what is that.
Can I jump into the
Sure.
why in the guts? Like I was just talking to someone this week that she got a new job and she was like, I had a gut feeling that I had something was telling me I shouldn't get the job, but I shouldn't do this. And I did get the job, and I applied, and now I'm having a terrible time. I'm having a terrible time. And she's like, there's something wrong there. So, I wanna allude to the fact that, science doesn't explain the supernatural, and we're gonna get that in a little bit. It doesn't get to the spiritual and to the emotional aspect of who we are and why we're here, purpose of life. Necessarily, a lot of the atheists would say that we are a product of chemistry, a chemical reaction, and that our thoughts are chemical reactions only, that our words are only, feelings are only chemical reactions that happen within. It's a very naturalistic way of looking at life. That takes away some purpose of who we are and what we're doing and what we're feeling. This whole idea of like loving God and loving others got to go beyond the physical world, which science has a little bit of a trouble with it, for sure. So in the realm of philosophy, though, and still answering this question, in the realm of philosophy, there is two different branches. One of the branches is called epistemology. And epistemology only focuses on the idea of knowledge, how to gain knowledge, and how can we know it, and what must we know. So it's like the source of knowledge, which is different than opinion. So I think science really explored the epistemological aspect of things. It's like, here, this is what we know, and this is how we know it. It goes beyond just your opinion about things, but it's facts. We are present for you some of the things that we have found. Another thing that it does, another realm of philosophy that is important for us is called ontology, that focus on what has existed. What exists, the nature of existence, the basic structure of reality, the basic systems of reality, the things that play a role in our lives every single day. And so those two came together on Matt's presentation the last few weeks really well in trying to help us understand how we know what we know and what we know, and how the functionality, that structure comes together for the well-being of creation itself.
Yeah, so, and the way that some people will say this, kind of summarizing what Sam just said, is like science will tell you the how. That's where theology and trying to understand this God thing comes in with the why. Okay, so where these two things kind of fit together. And so we were kind of, over the past few weeks, just kind of handling the how did this come together. And there are some people who will call them like materialists or whatever, that they think that the material world, like what Sam was saying about like that we're just a product of chemicals, and your thoughts are just a product of chemical reactions going on in your brain. There's a whole line of thought along that lines. And I would say, well, okay, what's the purpose? Why? And I'll use an analogy. I like analogies. This is a timely part of the year, right, that we're having this conversation today. Yesterday was the first day of the college football season for Ohio State, right? Most of you guys probably watched that. And but it takes place in a stadium. Now, we don't love football because of the stadium. The Horseshoe is a great place. It's amazing place to be in. It's really neat. It's beautiful. But it's there for the purpose of the game. Okay, you don't build the stadium unless you got the game. That's what we love, is the game, to watch that. It's got a history of players and coaches and people that we love and love to watch. And the outcome is unknown, and that's kind of addicting, this future that we aren't sure exactly what it's going to be, and the chance that it could be great or maybe not. That's something that we love. But it's about the game. So we don't want to worship the stadium. We want to understand. We really care about the game. That's the purpose of the stadium. Now, we can learn a lot about the game from the stadium without the stadium even having the game going on. Like, you could look at it and say, like, there's some lines there, there's some measurement going on, obviously. It looks like these goalposts are for something. There's a scoreboard. You could deduce a lot of information from it, even on a day where there's not anything going on. But it still doesn't give you the purpose. The stadium doesn't have purpose in itself. It's there for the game. And I think that's how I look at this world, this nature that we have. It's here, it's beautiful, it's amazing, but it's for the purpose of the game that we call relationship and love. And that's why it's built. And
I think that's one of the beautiful things you did throughout your your 4 weeks of talking that with us, sharing with us, is that you try to put into the epistemological and ontological things into creation, chapter 1 of Genesis, right? And like not only showing the processes and procedures that God took it, but also how we get to know some of the things that was created. I think one of the problems that we have in the church is that sometimes we say that God just like, there is a tree, and God like, and there's a tree showed up, and he skipped all the processes and procedures that he himself had created in order to put a tree together, in order for a tree to have life and to spur and become these huge places that host birds, right? So it's like, could God have skipped the process? Yes, but maybe not so much. Maybe God really took the time to see this development take place in creation, which really started to give us the purpose for why he created us, right? I have a homework for you today throughout this week is to study Psalm 39. 139. Psalm 139, David, the King David, he's exploring this very specific topic, like this very specific idea that God, he created, and the world is complex, and that God knows the complexity of it. This is what it says on verse 13. For you formed my inward parts. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works, O God. My soul knows it very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was being made in the secret, intricately woven in the depths of the earth. So David is like, listen, God is the one who orchestrated the whole thing. He's the one who put it together, the whole thing. And I think this is important for us to understand. Especially when we're skeptical about faith and about faith and science coming together, it is important that we separate the idea of getting a knowledge in the processes of the natural world with God Himself. The Bible affirms very clear to us that God, He is the one who created. And the word that David uses here, you formed me, my innermost parts, the inward parts of me. It is the same word that we have in Genesis chapter 7, where the Lord formed the man out of dust. In Genesis chapter 2, verse 7. Genesis chapter 2, verse 8. And the Lord planted a garden in the Eden, in the east. And there He put the man and the woman who He formed. Chapter 2, verse 19, we see another, that word being used again. Now, out of the ground, the Lord had formed, the Lord has formed every beast of the field, every bird of the heavens, and brought them to the man to see what he would call them. And whatever the man called every living creature, that was their name. So we see that what David was saying, what happened in Genesis is that God formed, that He created this complex system for life to exist, and we get to experience it. We get to get some knowledge about it, and we got to understand the basic structure of it.
Yeah, and you want to call up that other slide that we had?
The 7.
Yeah.
Slide 7?
Yeah. So we had, just bringing this back, if God created nature and Scripture, and both of those flow from Him, we don't see conflict there, okay? Our issue is where we inject human understanding of that, and that's down in those blue ovals with the humans. And then we create this thing called science and theology to understand how God did those things, how God created Scripture, and what it really means. And I think Sam can attest, in theology, there's differing opinions of how that goes. There's differing opinions in science, where humans are trying to understand nature as well. And that's really where the conflict is. So hopefully this gives you confidence that the further that you look and try to study both of these things, that you're going to find more concurrence there. Eventually, as our understanding gets better. So we don't want to, like, when I read that, we talked about skeptics. I'm a skeptic. I don't believe anything until I look into it and I go, yep, that's probably right. Okay, like the reason I have looked into all this stuff is because I'm always trying to decide, hey, is this thing coming from man or from God? Who came up with this idea? and that causes me to look further. And hopefully this will help everybody here to like kind of light a fire to look further and not be scared that like, I don't want to look too far because I might find something I don't like. Well, I mean, that's possible that you might not like it, but if it's moving closer towards God, then I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, so which is actually dealing with the second question. The second question, you start dealing with the second question there, Matt, which is how is faith more important than science? And I think that's one of the purposes why we decided to have this conversation to start with, to have this sermon series to start with, is to help people understand the relationship between science and faith. And I would go back to the slide that we were before, on slide 7, because Matt, I think, make a concise explanation, even now, that God, He created the natural world and the Scripture, and they should never be in conflict with each other. So how is faith more important than science? It is not. How is science more important than faith? They're not. They're both created by God in order for us to be able to understand the world that He's created, His character, and the purpose that we have in life.
Yeah, and I think, too, in our culture at least, there's this sort of mentality of like, well, you follow the science. Like, that's infallible. Like, it's science. Mm. We proved it. And it's like, well, I mean, if you look back in history, and if looking back in history is an indication of what we're going to see in the future, we got it kind of wrong a bunch of times in science. It's constantly moving toward, as more information is available, we change what our assumptions are and go, oh, man, 100 years ago, we look back to 100 years ago and think, wow, what an infantile understanding. And now we're like, okay, we have all this information available. My bet is, in 100 years, if we're all lucky enough to still be here, the understanding that we have then will be like, oh man, back in 2024, can you believe that they thought this, right? And so I think this faith thing, it's not only on the religious side. There is faith required for our scientific understanding. We don't know it all. An example I'll use of that is black holes. Black holes are unobservable because nothing escapes. The gravity is so high that not even light escapes, and they're really far away, so we can only view them by the light that comes out, right? But there's no light coming out, so you can't see it. So we say, well, it's unobservable, but we can kind of look around it and see how it affects all the stars and all the stuff out there around it, and deduce things about the character or characterize a black hole by its effect on the things around it, even though we can't directly see the black hole. That's faith, that there's a black hole there, okay? There's a number of other things that we don't know in science, and maybe we'll eventually understand it better, but the amount of information that we are coming out with right now is getting more and more and more faster than our understanding. So what that means is there's a guy named Dr. James Tour. He's a chemist. He uses a phrase that I kind of like, and he says, with every discovery, the goalposts move farther away. Means you discover there's more complexity there than you thought before, which then means your understanding is less than the total than it was before. Meaning, like, I'm now farther behind of the complete understanding than I thought I was a little bit ago with every single discovery we're finding. And that's on the huge scale. As our telescopes get bigger and better, we understand more about the universe. And as our microscopes get better and can understand more at the small scale, we're going, oh my gosh, there's so much more than we thought. And there's a few examples of that over the recent past that have kind of happened. And I think, and so here's the point we're trying to make, is that science, the culture tells us it is truth, and this is empirical truth, this is what you got to believe. And they say faith's a fairy tale, that's not true. And what we are trying to say is that let's reject a little bit the understanding of culture, and let's get a biblical understanding and know that science and faith ought to come together to explain the character of God and the things He has done. We had this conversation in my office, so my
push a couple of buttons here, and with the purpose for us to understand that the development and the evolution, not an evolution system, but evolution of science, the gaining of more knowledge has changed few things. Think about, for example, with me, gender, right? It's a whole conversation with gender we are having in our culture today. Back in the day, scientists came to us and said, listen, for you to figure out someone's gender, you cannot look that person from the outside, right? You cannot look, there are some inside things that tells you what gender you are, X, Y, and XX. Those are what dictate gender. It was science that told me. Would you have found it out differently? No, science was there and digged it up and, and found DNA, and then in the DNA said, hey, that's this gender is XY and this gender is XX. And so that's how we found out. But lately, they have been developing that idea to say, well, it's no longer what a DNA says, but it's what you look on the outside. I'm okay, whatever, whatever science says in a sense, but it's just to show the fact that science itself is not even sure of the things the science has spoke out of it.
Yeah.
It changes, it changes with
as we gain more information, and we layer on more information, and our understanding changes. I'll use an example of DNA. Is about late 90s, early 2000s, they declared we've mapped the human DNA. We understand the string of DNA, right? The double helix. It's got all this information in it. And they said, we understand it now, and most of it, like 6% or something like that, is actually non-coding. It doesn't do anything. And they labeled that junk DNA. They said 96% of this doesn't do anything, okay? And that was the prevailing understanding for like the next almost 20 years. And they said, well, that's just leftover mutations that didn't really have an effect. They just sort of stayed there, latent, not doing anything. And then in like 2015, 17, something like that, all of a sudden, as you can imagine, they go, uh-oh. That 96% we thought was junk all does something. And you go, uh-oh, now it's even more complex. I have a close family member who's a PhD in this realm of DNA stuff. And I was like, hey, I heard about this junk DNA finding. What does that mean? Her response was, it means we don't know very much. And I paraphrased for her. It was a little bit different phrase than that. But the point being, the more that we find, the more complexity we find, ordered complexity, and I'm perfectly okay with that, because that leads us to a little bit more indication that, hey, there's a designer behind the scenes here that created this, and we can have confidence.
Yeah, and I think that's where, for me, go back to Psalm 139, David, he says these, how precious to me are your thoughts, O God. How vast is the sum of them. Like, what God sees and what God knows, it is way beyond epistemology of ontology or what science can find or even what the Bible has explained to us, right? I mean, here's the thing. The Bible never changes. God's word remains the same. It has been for centuries now. But the idea that it is unlike science, who has been growing and developing and changing their minds and their ideas of things. I mean, another button that I push is like COVID. Through COVID, follow the science, and then now nobody talks about the science no more, right? Because things has developed, things has changed. I'm not saying we shouldn't follow this. I'm just saying the point I'm trying to make here is that science involved, knowledge is gained, and things are changed. So to live life only based solo on science information might not get you to the bottom of the truth.
Yes, and the other thing about it's asked, the question here was, which is more important, science or faith, right? And I think we have to talk about the idea of proof. And if you're talking to a skeptic or a person who's an atheist, they'll say, well, I will believe once I get proof, meaning like undisputable, I got proof, right? Well, proof, unfortunately, if you're going to live in a world with logic, then undermines something like free will, okay? And if you're going to have a relationship where you choose to love, free will is a real big important part of that. So by having proof of something, you then are undermining the idea of free will and therefore love. And that's the game we're talking about, right? So you kind of have to be okay with being like, hey, I got a ton of evidence and it's stacking up. But as soon as I get to that level of proof, and I am a huge geek, I will watch not just technical stuff, but I'll watch debates about like the origins of the universe and morality and things. And I'll watch sometimes all Christians talking, and sometimes I'll watch them debating against atheists, and sometimes I'll watch just atheists. And I was watching one where a panel of atheists, some of the most famous ones in the world, they write books and have huge crowds coming to them, and they were like, well, what level of proof would you require to believe in God and to follow him? And they said, well, I suppose if I saw, Jesus coming down in a chariot of fire out of the clouds, then I'd believe. And what that means is, with some level of proof, even people who have devoted their entire life to undermining God and saying religion is the thing that's wrong with the world and we need to ban it and get rid of it, would be compelled to follow God if they were given enough proof. Okay, so that's kind of when we discuss this, you'll notice I said, evidence or a better chance that this world is designed, because we got to leave room for us to have that choice, faith.
Yeah.
You got to leave a little bit of room because it's essential to that relationship.
So it's a perfect point. I love that. We talked a little bit about that. If I prove to you that this is a cup, there's nothing else you can do about it. It is it. And I think that God likes that idea of like, hey, just trust me on this. Have faith on and believe on what I am saying, so that you can see the promises in the future, what He's doing and continue to do in people's lives that we've done. Not based on proof only, but on faith. For sure, your testimony, knowing that God is working in your life, and then you can show that to the world, not as proof, but as that God is working in people.
And if the name of the game is logic, okay, that would be fine. Proof would be great, but it's not. It's love and choice, and those are very intertwined. So that's why we get, and what I believe is an overwhelming amount of evidence that God does exist, and that the point of this is love, but it's not going to get us quite to that level. So that's where we engage the skeptic and say, hey, there's enough evidence here to believe that God may exist. Now let's talk about what that looks like.
Yeah, I think we answered the first and the second question, I think. Do you want to jump into the third one?
Yeah.
This is the one that
hard to read.
This is a nerd wrote this one.
Let's see if I can do it. All right, so do the galaxy arm spirals follow the golden ratio or the Fibonacci spiral? Are they patterns in the Bible that follow the ratio or spirals, and such as like timelines, cities visited, family units, miracles? So what they're talking about here, the golden ratio or the Fibonacci spiral, it's a ratio, and it's like a series of numbers that get a little bit bigger by a particular amount based on the numbers that precede it in the series. And it's kind of a visual depiction of this would kind of look like the spiral that you see in a galaxy or maybe like a hurricane. And a lot of them do show this ratio. I looked into it. I'm not an expert in this stuff. I just kind of looked into it a little bit. The interesting thing about that is these ratios that show up in a lot of places in nature, they show up, I guess, in flowers, petals, and in sunflower seeds, like the design of those that you see when they form all these seeds within the middle of the sunflower there. And I think the important part is not necessarily that it's a ratio or what that number is or isn't. It's that it's repeatable patterns that we see out there in nature. And we see all of these, we see a lot of repeatable patterns and repeatable behaviors of things, and that's indicative of the designer is kind of what we've been getting at in this whole thing. Now, the second part of that question is, are there patterns in the Bible that follow this ratio? That is like a PhD level dissertation to dig into the Bible and try to find all that. Like that's we're talking.
I'll get to that once the kids are out of the house.
Yeah, Sam is going to undertake that for his.
I'll get to that. So wait up, and you get it one of these days.
So we'll have to.
But there is a
TBD
word.
On that one.
Yeah, I mean that's a big word right there. But here's the thing: there is a word that jumps out of that question to me, and especially when you're talking about patterns, right? The system and patterns that God have created. That's one of the things I was mostly enlightened with is that God didn't just pop things up. He created a process in precision by which things came into life, right? There is a sun, and well, before there was life, there must be a sun, and there must be energy, and the energy must be compressed, and then create this fusion thing that comes out in the light, in form of light that's going to hit Earth, and then photosynthesis is going to happen because of that, and now they're going to have air to breathe, and all this stuff. It's like, you made a concise argument that there is this system, this pattern, that it is repeatable, and it is trustworthy. It happens, has been happening for thousands of years, and will never stop doing that, right? But if God has created all of that, that pattern, there is a word here that Christians have to do with it all the time, that we don't know what to do with it, especially when we talk about science and we're talking about proof and reality, which is the word miracles. For people, how do we talk about miracles in this, in that sense?
So, if you go from nothing, and then you get something out of that, right? Which is what we call the beginning. I mean, we talked about in Genesis 1, the beginning starts, there was nothing, it was null, it was void, empty, and now we have matter and energy springing forth out of that. That is a miracle, statistically, scientifically. They don't know they don't know how that happened. There's a whole bunch of different attempts to explain that in a way that doesn't invoke a God, and that's fine with me, because that pokes the question more, and I'm fine with finding out more and more about that, because I think I know where it's going to lead. So if it starts with a miracle, then I'm the entity that is capable of that is then capable to suspend a particular law, or enact a new one, or create a new thing. Like that's not a deal breaker for me. And it goes all the way back to the very beginning, where creation started from nothing.
So you said that he can bend the rules a little bit?
If he made the rules, I guess he can bend them.
Okay.
And I can't complain. I don't have a universe that's any better, so I'm gonna have to go with what we see here.
Yeah, and I think if God knows what it takes to grow a hand, he can make a hand grow with no problem, right? He can restart the process of growth within the system, and the hand would appear. But don't go out cutting your hands off. That's not gonna turn out so good for you. Third, the last question 4 that we were given was this one.
Yeah, okay, so this could be a grenade. We're gonna see how we do this one. So I've never been able to understand dinosaurs and fossils that are millions of years old sometimes. The Bible, I don't believe, says anything about dinosaurs. Can you help me understand how these things fit into the creation story? And for me, the Bible doesn't mention a lot. Like, there are a ton, there are billions of different organisms on Earth, and it doesn't mention all of them. It mentions kind of the big categories of them, which I discussed, and it was actually really hard for me to whittle down all that there is and say, what are the important parts that we should talk about? Which is why I just said, well, we'll use Genesis 1 as our guide for what things we're going to talk about. But there are nearly limitless more numbers of organisms that are in there. We have an infatuation in our society with dinosaurs, and they're a big deal. We make toys for them, we make movies about them, but there's a whole lot else that's not mentioned in the Bible as well. It's not an exhaustive the Bible isn't an exhaustive list of everything out there. And I know this invokes the question of like time, like how long have we been around? How long have dinosaurs been around? This is the wrong format to handle this. There's this whole day-age argument. I'm sure Sam knows it well, and it's over what's the actual meaning of the word yom, which is the word that they use for day. One piece of information that Sam picked up on pretty quick when we were talking about this at the beginning was when you have the tilt of the earth, and that means that the length of your days changes if you're above or below the Arctic or Antarctic circles. So if you do say, like, well, a day means in there a 24-hour, literal 24-hour day, that's not necessarily true even just on Earth right now.
Yeah, that's not a reality on Earth.
Yeah.
That 24 hours day is not a reality right here, right now on planet Earth.
The sun sets and rises once a year at the North and South Poles, so they have 100 or 365 day. As you move lower, you might have 40 days between sunrise and sunset. So now that doesn't get you the difference between 6 to 10,000 years and 14 billion, right?
Sure.
So that's not going to account for the difference in time understanding between, if you take the literal interpretation of the Bible as far as time. But I would just say there's a lot more to be learned, and does it really matter? I believe not necessarily, and if you are a eternal, and when we're talking on the scale of eternity, 6,000 years and 14 billion years are not, that's not even an argument to have on the scale of eternity for an eternal being. Okay, so that's why I say, does it really matter? I don't know. I don't think so, but I'm anxious to find out more. I think we'll learn more in the near future as our telescopes get better and our microscopes get better. We're going to learn more about that time, and it's going to inform our understanding of the Bible and how we are to treat those verses.
And when it comes to dinosaur, dinosaur existed. We have actually empirical proof of that. They have found bones of dinosaur laying around. So the Bible doesn't mention, because it doesn't mention a lot of things. God was necessarily concerned with T-Rex, but we know, I think one of the problems with the dinosaurs for Christians is the carbon dating thing, which I was just watching something the other day about scientists, not Christian people, debating about the science behind the carbon dating, how there's a lot of pushback on carbon dating right now because the math is just not adding it up. So they're trying to debate among themselves, what does this mean? So I am sure in the next 5 to 10 years, the carbon dating whole thing is going to change. The understanding of that is going to change. It's going to maybe change how old or how young the earth is in scientific manners. The reality is that God created, and he created the time that he chose, and we are here to enjoy it. That was dinosaurs. Some people say they were in the ark. Some people don't say they're in the ark. Here's the sad thing about dinosaur, or maybe the good thing.
I'm fine not with the dinosaurs.
They're not here no more. So maybe we'd be running away from. I was watching. This is dumb. I was watching Godzilla the other day. There's a whole. Have you watched Godzilla?
Yeah.
Yeah, like the dino. Can you imagine you're like driving your car and out of a sudden this big thing come out of water? What? I'm glad God took them away. I don't know what you guys are thinking, but I'm okay with no dinosaur around.
I'm thankful that they are not walking the earth right now. Yes.
Yeah. I'm like, do you want a dinosaur? Get married. Look at you. I am joking. I knew you guys would react to that, so that's why I did that. Matt, any final words after the dinosaur comment? Joellen's going to beat me up. Yeah. She's like...
Oh, man. We talked about a lot of stuff. I hope this has given you confidence that you're not in some sort of position, if you are a believer, that you're not in some sort of position of, like, inferiority. Like, that you don't have, like that you have to pretend to be able to believe what you believe. I hope that you come away with a feeling that it is reasonable. You can enjoy both logic and this belief at the same time, and that then you can have a conversation with those who don't necessarily see the world the same that you do, and discuss what that looks like and why. And sometimes it'll work, sometimes it won't. There's room for the Holy Spirit to come in there, but hopefully we've accomplished this over the past few weeks.
Matt, I appreciate you so much. Thank you so much.
I appreciate you, and that I don't have to come up here anymore.
Yeah, that's right. I do gotta say this. I am trying to convince Matt, and I'm putting this out there for more pressure. So so there's more pressure into it. I'm trying to convince Matt to teach a class once a year here at Delaware Christian Church that deals with science and faith, and to continue on this understanding, to develop all of our understanding about what the natural world that God has created. And so I'm looking forward to next year having him creating having some classes that we can all attend and learn more about the scientific world. Maybe it's a more detailed, because as you found out, you have 30 minutes to talk about a topic that is so huge. It's kind of hard to put it together.
It's real hard to cram it into that short time.
But there is a book. This book here, it is a great book to help you understand the journey someone goes from skepticism to belief. So I would love for you to to purchase this book and read it. It will allow you to understand how someone goes from a skeptical of the existence of God or what's going on to a walk of faith. And it is in a narrative format. It's easy read. It is very good. Informative book, and I would love for you to take a look at this book. It will allow you to gain more knowledge about all that Matt has talked about. We were gonna put information about it on the church website and also on the social media if you didn't get it right now. But it's called Burdensome Proof. It is a good book.